On Monday, French President Emmanuel Macron delivered a speech aimed at kickstarting the biggest shift in the European nuclear weapons landscape since the Cold War. Stating that the next half a century will be an era of nuclear weapons, Macron stood dramatically in front of a nuclear submarine at France's Ile-Longue base, announced that France would expand its nuclear arsenal, and unveiled a new doctrine of forward deterrence, which entails nuclear cooperation with European partners and allows for the deployment of French nuclear-armed aircraft on Allied soil for the first time ever. With Europe questioning the reliability of American security guarantees, we're going to take a look at the French nuclear deterrent and explain Macron's plans to expand it. We've heard a lot of talk about Europe de-risking or decoupling from the US recently. So in the latest issue of our magazine, we thought we'd discuss whether it's actually feasible and why Europe could still struggle without US backing. That's just one of the 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, let's start by taking a look at the current state of France's nuclear deterrent, known as the Force de Dissuasion. With an estimated 290 nuclear warheads, France has the fourth largest nuclear arsenal in the world. The backbone of this French deterrent is the seaborne component. 4 Triomphant-class submarines based in Brittany, and capable of wielding long-range nuclear-armed ballistic missiles. And since 1972, at least one nuclear-armed submarine has been out at sea at all times. This seaborne component is complemented by an airborne one, which comprises 40 nuclear-capable Rafale fighter jets based in mainland France, and 10 more which can be deployed on board the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier. France is one of 2 nuclear-armed European countries, the other being the UK, and is therefore the only nuclear-armed EU member state. Unlike the UK's nuclear deterrent, which is only seaborne and, while operationally independent, is dependent on US technology and support, France's nuclear deterrent is fully independent, something set in motion under President Charles de Gaulle in the 1950s. France has sovereign control of the design, manufacturing, deployment and operations of its nuclear arms, and the hardware that carries them. And France is also the only NATO member that's not a member of the alliance's nuclear planning group. The goal of France's nuclear capability is to deter an attack on its vital interests, as any adversary knows that France could hit back by inflicting absolutely unacceptable damage on its centres of power. As such, France's nuclear doctrine is based on the principle of strict sufficiency. In other words, maintaining the minimum amount of nuclear weapons needed to inflict said damage, rather than massive stockpiles for large-scale nuclear war. For the rest of Europe, or at least NATO allies in Europe, they've spent decades under the US nuclear umbrella. Broadly speaking, it's the US's nuclear forces that NATO considers to be the supreme guarantee of the security of the alliance. Now, it was in a speech back in 2020 that Macron first floated strategic nuclear dialogue with European allies. However, this proposal didn't gain much traction. 6 years later, though, the geopolitical environment is very different. Russia's invasion of Ukraine brought war back to Europe and sent defense and security to the top of the continental agenda. Additionally, in the face of apparent ambivalence and even outright hostility towards Europe from the Trump administration, European states now view the reliability of the US's nuclear umbrella as increasingly uncertain, even as the US has officially continued to reaffirm its commitment to its extended nuclear deterrence. So, European nations are now much more interested in what France might have to offer. So, what did Macron announce in his speech? Macron ordered an increase in the size of France's nuclear arsenal to ensure that the French deterrent retains its guaranteed destructive power in a dangerous, shifting and proliferating international environment, though he added that France would no longer disclose the size of its stockpile. He further asserted that to be free, one must be feared, and that to be feared, one must be powerful. Macron also announced that France's next-generation nuclear ballistic missile submarines class would be named Invincible and would enter service in 2036. These upgrades to France's nuclear capabilities are significant, but it was in another part of the speech that Macron had more consequential words for the European security landscape. He outlined what he called a forward nuclear deterrent strategy that would involve deeper nuclear cooperation between France and several other European partners in exercises and potential deployments. Currently, these plans are most developed with fellow nuclear power, the UK, with whom France signed the Northwood Declaration in 2025 to boost nuclear cooperation, as well as with Germany, who Macron described as a key partner, with the French and German governments announcing a new high-level nuclear steering group on Monday. Macron also named Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Greece, Sweden and Denmark as countries that have agreed to take part, and said discussions were underway with several others. Macron said that forward deterrence would be distinct but perfectly complementary with NATO's nuclear mission, and that the work conducted so far has been carried out in full transparency with the US. The forward deterrence approach would enable joint exercises between France's nuclear forces and the conventional forces of European allies, and allow for temporary deployment of French nuclear-armed aircraft on Allied territory. Macron argued that this would allow France's airborne nuclear deterrent to spread out across the depth of the European continent, like how its submarines can disperse through oceans, and thus complicate the calculations of France's adversaries. Macron firmly reiterated, though, that this cooperation would not mean any sharing of decision-making. The ultimate decision to use nuclear weapons, as well as their planning and implementation, would remain solely in the hands of the French president. The details of how cost-sharing would work are also not clear, although Macron suggested that Allied investments in key areas like enhanced air defences and deep strike capabilities would be a good contribution to European security. There are several other points left deliberately vague or ambiguous, though. Like successive French presidents, Macron affirmed that France's vital interests, the thing that the nuclear weapons are meant to deter an attack on, have a European dimension, saying, "Can we imagine that the survival of our closest partners could be jeopardized without this affecting our vital interests?" However, Macron intentionally did not define these vital interests, or their European dimensions, saying that it remains a matter of sovereign judgment for France, and adding that the burgeoning nuclear partnerships come with no guarantee in the strict sense of the term, because any definition or rigid guarantee would reduce the uncertainty of France's adversaries. Macron's forward deterrence is therefore far from the US's extended nuclear deterrence in Europe, and he's underlined that the goal is not to replace the US's nuclear weapons or NATO as Europe's primary security guarantee, nor would he have the capacity even if he wanted. Rather, he said that he aims to complement it. The challenge for Macron, who leaves office next year, is to move quickly and lock in enough progress to reduce the risk that any successor, say Jordan Bardella, might be able to undo it. There also remain unanswered questions about the financing of this warhead increase and the potential extraterritorial deployments. After all, Europe is already trying to finance a massive build-up in conventional capabilities, let alone nuclear ones. Nevertheless, the announcement and apparent widespread interest shows how much European thinking has changed in just a few years. As we mentioned earlier, the latest issue of our magazine, Too Long, is out very soon. And if you subscribe using code SPRING26, then you can get your first copy for as little as $4.99, as well as 20% off every future copy, as long as you stay subscribed. This latest issue features our ranking of the world's 25 most influential people, using ratings from you, our audience, as well as our journalists. Inside, we reveal not only the full ranking, but also the stories of a number of people who made the list. From the return of Donald Trump and the calculated moves of Xi Jinping, to the AI frontiers of Sam Altman. We also look at the new entries, New York's first Muslim Mayor Zohran Mamdani, the radical shift of Pope Leo XIV, and bastion of technocracy Mark Carney, as well as the shadows that still linger, like Jeffrey Epstein. Across 72 pages, this issue of Too Long features a whole lot more than just that, though. We also have our whole cover story dedicated to how the UK became more divided than ever, and how a broken country can rebuild, as well as the fragmentation that's emerged within the EU, and how religion is being hijacked by politicians. Pre-order your copy at toolong.news, and remember to use code SPRING26 for our best ever price.